I never imagined that moving into my dream home would eventually lead to someone pouring cement into my car. But then again, I never imagined I'd be dealing with Deborah Wilson, the president of our HOA and, as I would soon learn, the self-proclaimed queen of Sycamore Hills. It all started about 3 months ago when I bought a beautiful 2-story colonial. Quiet neighborhood, spacious yard, just the kind of place I thought I could settle into and enjoy some peace. During closing, the real estate agent briefly mentioned there was a homeowners association, but reassured me they were fair and reasonable. Looking back, that should have been my first clue to run. Within 48 hours of moving in, I found a bright orange notice taped to my front door. Apparently, the white I'd used on my backyard fence was the wrong shade, eggshell, not the approved pearl white. Honestly, I couldn't see the difference, but the notice gave me 72 hours to repaint it or be fined $100. It was signed by Deborah Wilson herself, complete with her title and phone number for questions. Trying to be neighborly, I gave her a call, just to explain I was new and unaware of the specific paint rule. Her response was robotic and icy. Mr. Mitchell, ignorance of the rules does not exempt you from them. The bylaws were included in your closing packet. I suggest you read them thoroughly. Then she hung up. So yeah, classic HOA Karen behavior. I decided to just repaint the fence. It cost less than the fine, and I didn't want to start a feud with the neighborhood's gatekeeper. But that gesture of goodwill didn't buy me any peace. If anything, it made things worse. Over the next few weeks, I started receiving one citation after another. My grass was supposedly half an inch too long. My garden hose was clearly visible from the street. One time, my trash bins were placed out 5 hours early, and that earned me a $75 warning. I tried to contest a few of these. Every time, Deborah responded with the same smug tone, quoting bylaws word for word like she had them tattooed somewhere. The strange part? None of my neighbors seemed to be getting hassled like this. In fact, the house directly across from me had a full basketball hoop in the driveway, an explicit violation I'd now memorized thanks to reading the HOA handbook cover to cover out of survival. One evening, I pulled into my driveway after a long day at work and saw Deborah fast walking down the street in her pastel tracksuit, clipboard in hand like she was on some kind of authority patrol. She made a beeline toward my property. "Evening, Deborah," I greeted, doing my best to stay civil. "Something I can help you with?" She didn't even fake a smile, just looked me over and said, "Your car is in violation. Section 12, paragraph 4. No vehicles may remain in driveways for more than 30 minutes unless they are in pristine condition. Yours is mud on the wheel wells." I stared at her for a moment, genuinely baffled. Sure, I had driven through a bit of rain that day, but there was just a little dried mud. Not exactly offensive. I just got home from work. I explained, "I'll wash it this weekend, but come on, this can't really be a finable offense." Her face turned red. "I decide what qualifies as a violation, Mr. Mitchell. And I've noticed a pattern. You seem to have a problem respecting authority." That's when I realized this wasn't about the rules. This was personal. That's when I made what Deborah must have considered my biggest mistake. I laughed. Not a loud or mocking laugh, just a short chuckle at how ridiculous the situation had become. But to her, that small laugh was a declaration of war. Her eyes went wide. Her grip on the clipboard tightened until her knuckles turned white. "You won't be laughing when you get your next fine," she hissed. Then she turned sharply and stormed off without another word. The next morning, I woke up early. I had a major virtual client meeting and wanted to make sure everything was in order. I grabbed my briefcase and stepped outside. But halfway down the walkway, I froze. My car wasn't in the driveway where I had parked it the night before. In its place was a rectangular shape covered by a large blue tarp. My stomach dropped. Heart racing, I yanked the tarp off and just stood there in disbelief. It was my car. But the entire interior, seats, dashboard, steering wheel, was filled to the brim with hardened concrete. Cement, quick drying and completely solidified. It had flooded the inside and ruined everything. For several seconds, I couldn't move, couldn't speak. My mind couldn't process the sight in front of me. Then instinct kicked in. I grabbed my phone and called 911. While I waited for the police, I remembered something. My neighbor John had installed a security camera on his garage after a few package thefts months ago. It faced right toward our side of the street, including my driveway. When the officers arrived, I explained everything and pointed out the camera. They were stunned. I've seen some crazy HOA disputes. One officer said, "But this is on another level." They took my statement and walked over to speak with John about the footage. 2 hours later, I was at the local police station sitting next to two officers, watching the security video playback on a monitor. There was no doubt. At 3:02 a.m., the footage showed Deborah Wilson walking down the street with a man in a work uniform. He was carrying several 5-gallon buckets. They approached my car. She used a Slim Jim to unlock it. Then, one by one, they poured the content of the buckets, cement, into my car through the open windows. The entire act took nearly 30 minutes. It was deliberate, methodical, cold. The officers turned to me. "Do you want to press charges?" I didn't even hesitate. "Yes, absolutely." They listed out the possible charges: criminal mischief, destruction of property, unlawful entry. The damage alone was staggering. The cost of the car, $22,000, was a total loss. The cement had not only destroyed the interior, but it had also leaked into the engine bay. There was no salvaging it. An officer made a call, and within the hour, they obtained a warrant for Deborah's arrest. I'll never forget the image of her being let out of her pristine ranch-style house in handcuffs. She was still in her bathrobe and slippers, visibly furious. The quiet neighborhood came alive as neighbors peeked from their porches and windows. Her eyes locked on mine from across the street. "This is your fault," she screamed. "You never respected the rules. You never respected me." The officers quietly placed her into the back of the patrol car and drove away. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel smug. I just felt stunned. How did something so petty, mud on a wheel well, turn into felony property damage? In the days and weeks that followed, I dealt with insurance adjusters, detectives, and even a district attorney. I learned that Deborah had a long history of taking her HOA duties too far, but most people either gave in or moved out. I was the first to stand up to her. And apparently, that triggered something deeper, something dangerous. The DA informed me they'd be moving forward with felony charges due to the extent of the damage and the clear premeditation. Deborah's spotless HOA record had masked a pattern of escalating behavior that no one had dared confront until now. The entire situation took an even more unexpected turn when the man who helped Deborah vandalize my car came forward. As it turned out, he was a contractor who had previously renovated Deborah's kitchen. She had blackmailed him into helping her, threatening to report supposed building code violations on his past projects if he didn't cooperate. Faced with the risk of losing his license and business, he agreed to testify against her in exchange for reduced charges. 3 months after the incident, I found myself sitting in a courtroom as Deborah stood before the judge for sentencing. She had been found guilty on all counts. Her defense had been weak and unconvincing. She claimed she was just trying to enforce community standards, but the judge wasn't having any of it. "Ms. Wilson," the judge began, his voice firm and echoing in the quiet room, "your position as HOA president came with authority, but also with responsibility. Instead of serving your community fairly, you abuse your power to pursue a personal vendetta." He glanced briefly at the papers in front of him before continuing. "This court sentences you to 6 months in county jail, 2 years of supervised probation, and full restitution to Mr. Mitchell in the amount of $22,000 for the destruction of his property." He paused, then added, "Additionally, you are hereby barred from serving on any HOA board in any capacity for the rest of your life." For the first time since all of this began, Deborah's carefully maintained composure broke. Her face twisted and she gasped out, "But Your Honor, I've spent years keeping Sycamore Hills beautiful. I've devoted my life to protecting property values. I can't go to jail. I have a reputation." The judge didn't flinch. "You should have considered the consequences before pouring cement into someone's vehicle," he said flatly. Then he turned to the bailiff. "Please take the defendant into custody." As Deborah was led away in handcuffs, tears streaming down her face. She turned briefly and looked at me. Our eyes met. In that instant, I didn't see rage or even regret. I saw confusion. Even then, as her world collapsed, she truly couldn't understand how her twisted obsession with rules and control had brought her to this point. The gavel fell, and with that final crack, it was over. Deborah Wilson, once the self-proclaimed guardian of Sycamore Hills, was gone, and though life in the neighborhood slowly returned to normal, things were never quite the same. The HOA board was restructured, rules were reviewed, neighbors who had kept their heads down before started speaking up. It turned out all it took to break the silence was one cement-filled car.